the Borderlands games, getting to Capstone, or the bottommost skill in a skill tree, is a sign that you put in time and effort to build your character into a badass. But some capstone skills just aren't up to the high standard of others. From the lackluster to the underpowered, let's count down the top 10 worst capstone skills in Borderlands history.
And number 10 is...
Starting off at number 10 is Dominance for Flak. Now, Dominance has gotten better since the launch of Borderlands 3, much like the entire game has. But why on earth would you capstone out the blue tree for Flak when everybody knows that the purple tree is where it's at? Okay, so I'm kidding, and more on the purple tree later, but in all seriousness, Flak gets most of their damage from the orange and green trees, and the capstone in both of those is exceptional. So to give one of those up to control an enemy for 12 seconds just doesn't feel even remotely worth it. Maybe if you can control multiple enemies at once, even then, I don't know. Also, the effect doesn't work on bosses for obvious reasons, and some bosses have no enemies nearby to dominate, so it can be very pointless.
Number 9! No, Gary, that's an upside down 6! Who are you trying to fool?
Sliding in at number 9, Wilhelm in the pre-sequel had a cool concept with their skill tree. As you spec further down, Wilhelm became more of a cyborg and less human, but Wilhelm also has a tree dedicated to increasing the damage of his drones, Wolf and Saint, and the capstone for that tree is called a Mega Strike. Now, a Mega Strike is only for Wolf, not for Saint, and will allow it to periodically launch missiles at enemies. Now, that sounds pretty cool. Well, the damage just isn't that good for the points investment to get to this capstone, and Wilhelm's other two capstones are much more deserving. Also, a Mega Strike isn't boosted by Rolling Thunder, which is supposed to increase its damage when stacked up. So while it's not a horrible capstone, it's just not very useful, and that point could be much more beneficial elsewhere.
Don't hate, it's number 8!
At number 8, Mose has a ton of great skills and 3 very good capstones, but her 4th tree, added with the designer's cut or season pass 2, has a capstone that just feels kind of pointless, running on fumes. This skill reads, when you or Iron Bear ignite an enemy, Iron Bear stops passively consuming fuel for a short time. Now, this sounds like a skill to keep Iron Bear going 24/7, but honestly, Mose's greatest damage comes from jumping in and then back out of Iron Bear and short bursts of damage in Iron Bear. Also, Mose has class mods that basically can keep Iron Bear going almost non-stop anyhow, and the Eternal Flame class mod obtained from Arms Race can actually roll with a point already in this capstone, so you don't even need to spec down to it. The skill feels kind of like a middle of the tree skill, and Big Surplus from the top of the tree feels like it should have been the capstone. This is a common problem for Mose, having skills that are unlocked easily being much stronger than the capstones. And yes, I'm looking directly at you, Fire in the Skag Den.
Number 7!
At number 7, Aurelia from the pre-sequel has a capstone called a Backhand to Remember, and it's very forgettable. Located in Aurelia's contractual aristocracy tree, you have to spend 21 points to get here, most of which are co-op only skills. Now, there are a few good skills in that tree, but this capstone is just not great. You backhand an enemy via melee override, it knocks the enemy back and deals cryo melee damage. This boosts movement speed and reload speed for 12 seconds, and then has a 12-second cooldown. Movement and reload speed boost is 20%. So basically what I'm saying is for just about 20 skill points, you get to run faster and reload your guns 1/5 quicker. Yay. Now, like Mose a moment ago, this skill feels like it should have been unlocked much earlier in the tree, with a different skill being the capstone.
All right, moving along. Number 6.
At number 6, Amara has some strong capstones, but Clear the Mind is not one of them. Killing an enemy lets you ignore enemy elemental resistance for 8 seconds. This does not affect elemental immunity, which would be okay, but Amara mains usually have a bunch of elements stacked up as it is. Sure, being able to apply damage in an element that the enemy would normally resist is nice, but it's truly only useful in very specific circumstances, like General Tron or Wotan, and honestly, you're not going to have trouble killing either of those, even if you've never put a single point in anything in this tree, let alone the capstone. Can this skill be useful? Sure, I guess. But all 3 of Amara's other capstones are much more deserving.
I know 5 ways to kill a guy with a sign, Gary. 5!
At number 5, Maya's Thought Lock. Now this skill has a few issues. First off, in order to capstone this skill, you would need to give up either Ruin or Scorn, and anybody that's used those two skills knows that they are excellent for Maya. Second, this skill only lasts for 4 seconds. 4 F-O-U-R, and while having a badass not focus on you for a whopping 4 seconds is kind of nice, it's hardly worth your entire phase lock skill where you can hold an enemy in place for 5 seconds. Granted, during that time that an enemy is thought locked, you can still shoot them and they do damage to other enemies on your behalf, so it's not all bad, but it's just lacking as a capstone skill. It's very similar to Flack's previously mentioned dominance skill, but that one lasts 12 seconds. Like a lot of Borderlands 2 skills, this one could still use some tweaks.
Moving on to number 4.
At number 4, imagine a skill where you literally stand around waiting for a high five from allies or a melee attack from an enemy. That's the high fives guy's capstone for Claptrap. You ask for a high five. If you're playing with co-op and a teammate high fives you by meleeing you, then you get 15% gun damage and 50% fire rate along with 3% health regen. You can technically get this bonus, however, if an enemy melees you, but it's hardly worth it being a capstone. This does feel very on brand for Claptrap, begging for high fives and thinking that a punch from an enemy was actually a high five that just missed the target, but the benefit of this capstone does not feel even remotely worth standing around with your hand up, not doing any damage and not helping your teammates.
You know what they say about a third wheel? Well, here's number 3.
Coming in at number 3, Axton is a character that really grew on me a bit after my last playthrough, but one of his capstones that I've always despised is the nuke skill in the gunpowder tree. For some bizarre reason, this thing doesn't do explosive damage, it deals fire damage, and that damage has a lower elemental damage multiplier than normal. The nuke also doesn't scale well with ultimate Vault Hunter mode and OP levels, but it does hit enemies through walls, so if you want to tickle an enemy in another room, good news. On paper, this skill sounds amazing, especially if you're building your Axton to do as much explosive damage as possible, but for a capstone skill, this one really shows just how disappointing some of them can be. Gearbox, make this thing do explosive damage and suddenly it's good.
And now for the king of the losers, number 2.
Coming in at number 2 is Gage's with Claws capstone. Imagine this, melee Gage. Sure, it's possible, but let's assume that you stacked up 600 stacks of Anarchy using the Slayer Terramorphous class mod. That means that you had to shoot some stuff. With this capstone, that means that you would deal 360% melee damage, which on Ultimate Vault Hunter mode OP10 is just enough to make an enemy laugh at you right before they one-shot you. Granted, this skill also does heal you as you melee, but it also eats up your Anarchy stacks as you do damage and healing. Hardly worth the capstone in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, especially when you consider that Zero has a skill in the top row of the Bloodshed skill tree that gives him 500% melee damage without having to sit around stacking Anarchy. This skill was a good idea that just never got the proper attention and love that it needed from the developers.
Dishonorable mention.
Honorable mention goes to pretty much all the capstones in Borderlands 1. I didn't include any of them in this main list since Borderlands 1 was basically the start of the whole Borderlands skill tree system, so it was kind of a learning experience for the developers. Roland's Guided Missiles, Brick's Unbreakable, Mordecai's Trespass, and Lilith's Mind Games. None of these are horrible, but they would be the equivalent of like a tier 2 or 3 skill in Borderlands 2 or 3. I would say that Mordecai's Trespass is actually really decent. However, Zero has Boar in the middle of his skill tree and Zane has a Racer like 3/4 of the way down his tree. So yeah, you get the idea.
It's number 1.
Finally, at number 1 is Flack's Capacitance skill. Activating your action skill starts your shield recharge and doubles your current shield for a short time. This skill is just kind of boring and it's located as the capstone in the purple tree for Flack, meaning that you would have to completely throw away a bunch of skill points to get to it, since that tree is widely considered the worst in the game. Honestly, that tree is arguably the worst in the franchise. Specking all the way down to this capstone feels very pointless, especially since all you're getting is more shields. Hell, want more shields? Just get a Madcap or a front loader shield. I know the idea of this tree is survivability for Flack, but honestly the whole tree is just a bit of a disaster. Now, fair is fair, those were my picks for the worst capstones, but let me hear what capstones you guys think are the best overall in the series down in the comment section below. I might use your comment in the follow-up video. If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button, tap the bell icon to be notified anytime I post more Borderlands content, and hit that like button to show this video some love with the YouTube algorithm. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.